What's going on everybody, Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 5 of the best phones you can use with Boost Mobile. Now as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about any of the phones in this video, be sure to check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So up first, we got the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G. Definitely if you're looking for an affordable 5G phone that may not necessarily be a really fancy device, but has pretty much all the basics and a lot of versatility too, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G is definitely worth considering. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.6-inch 120Hz PLS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So overall, definitely a really nice display here. With the 120Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a bit faster and smoother, which overall is going to make the phone feel a bit more premium to use. With the 1080p resolution, of course, we're going to get a nice sharp image. So if you're doing stuff like watching videos, for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, then this is definitely going to be a great thing for you. And at 6.6 inches, the display is definitely on the larger side in general, so if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, you will get a pretty good experience. So as far as the display goes here, I really have no complaints. With the A23 5G, we are getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and granted, compared to all the other phones in this video, this is the lowest storage here, so if storage is really a priority for you, then compared to these other phones, this might not be the best choice, but still for the average user, I feel like 64GB is at least decent. And for most people, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone and you make sure to offload things onto a microSD card whenever you can, I feel like you should get by just fine. But again, if you're someone who's constantly downloading apps and games and stuff like that, then you might want to choose one of the other phones here, because every other phone in this video does have more storage than this. For security features, with the A23 5G, we are getting Face Unlock here and a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. But real quick, let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. For the camera setup here, up front, we got a water drop notch for the selfie camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So definitely a good amount of features here. For a mid-range phone, it has pretty much everything, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. So if you do want that kind of variety, you're definitely not going to go wrong with this phone. And in addition to having a good amount of features, the photo quality here is pretty good too. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G. So of course, definitely decide for yourself whether or not this is actually good enough for you, but in general, I feel like for what it is, for most people, it probably will get the job done. If you're taking pictures for something like Instagram, for example, I do think this phone will be perfect for that, because while it's definitely not nearly as good as some of the other phones in this video that are a bit higher end, the photo quality is still definitely good. So for a more casual user, I feel like this is really all you're gonna need. But keep in mind with this phone, when it comes to video, this phone does have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here. For the RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. Now overall, the performance compared to the other phones in this video is maybe not the best, but at the same time, for casual daily use and really anything the average person might be using a smartphone for, it will get the job done. So if you're doing stuff like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, using the phone as a phone of course, and then maybe some light mobile gaming, for that kind of activity, the A23 5G will get the job done. And personally with this phone, I haven't had any slowdowns or lagging or really any performance issues at all. So for what it is, I do think the performance we're getting here is decently impressive. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone will be a performance upgrade for you, because depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not be. But again, in general, for what it is, I do think the performance here is pretty good. For the battery, the A23 5G has a 5000 mAh battery that also supports 25W fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. With the 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get real good battery life and longevity, so if that is a priority for you, you're not going to go wrong with this phone. And with 25W fast charging, the charging speed will be pretty good too. But keep in mind, this phone does not have wireless charging. For the software, the A23 5G does have Android 13, and with Samsung software support, you can also expect to get Android 14, 15, and 16, so definitely plenty of updates here. So if the software is more important to you, again, this phone will be a pretty good choice. In addition to this, when it comes to other features, the A23 5G does have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you'll be happy to know you can use that with this phone no problem. Up next, we got the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus. Definitely another great affordable option if you're looking for a 5G phone but you don't want to spend a whole lot of money. Now with this phone, we're getting a really large 6.95-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 386, and a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. So definitely a huge display here, and on one hand I know it's not really for everyone. In fact, some people want the complete opposite, so obviously if that's you, you're not gonna like this, but of course, on the other hand, some people do want a really large display, so if you're maybe doing a lot of reading or just consuming content in general, and you want things to show up larger and just be easier to see, then this phone will definitely be a great choice. And not only are we getting a really large display, but the image quality is pretty good too. With the 1080p resolution, things are gonna be nice and sharp, and with a 120Hz refresh rate, just like the A23 5G, with this phone, the movement on the screen is gonna be a bit faster and smoother, so it is gonna have that nice premium feel too. For storage, the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus has 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion too. So if you are looking for a more affordable phone that has plenty of storage, you definitely won't go wrong here. For security features, with the Celero 5G Plus, unfortunately this phone does not have Face Unlock, but it does at least have a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So can't go wrong with a power key fingerprint scanner. Let's give it a try. There we go. One more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive, no issues at all. For the camera setup, with this phone, we got a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So definitely nice to see the ultra wide camera here, but unfortunately, the Celero 5G Plus for whatever reason doesn't have a macro camera. Now, personally for me, I've never really found a macro camera particularly useful anyway, so yeah, if it were me, I really wouldn't care about this. But if you do want a macro camera, then you might want to get something else. But aside from that, again, this phone does at least have an ultra wide camera, and with a 50 megapixel camera, you can expect to get at least decent photo quality. To give you an idea of what the camera can do, here's some pictures taken with the Celero 5G Plus. Now overall, compared to like the A23 5G for example, and really every other phone in this video for that matter, I would say the photo quality here is definitely not the best. I mean, it will get the job done for occasional casual use, but if you're really taking a lot of pictures on social media, sending things to friends and family, maybe you're using your camera for work for example, and you really want to get the best photo quality you can for the money, I feel like with this phone it's not terrible, but at the same time it's still really not the best. So in general, you can do better if it's really a priority for you, but at the same time, for what it is, I do think the quality we're getting here is at least decent. For the RAM and processor, with the Celero 5G Plus, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 processor. So yeah, this phone does actually have the same processor as the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G, but it does have a bit more RAM too. So between these two, I would definitely not use performance as a deciding factor, because of course, having the same processor, you're pretty much gonna get the same experience. Although with 2 more gigabytes of RAM, for certain activities, the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus might be a bit better, but honestly, if you cared that much about performance, you might as well get one of these other phones, which all of these are significantly faster than either of these two, but at the same time for more basic everyday use. Just like the A23 5G, the Celero 5G Plus will definitely get the job done. Now here are the scores I got for this phone on Geekbench 6. So yeah, as you can see, pretty similar to the A23, really not much of a difference. But again, definitely compare this to your current device. But in general, for a mid-range phone, if you are looking for something for more basic activities, for most people, the performance you get with this phone will most likely be good enough. For the battery, the Celero 5G Plus does have a 5000 mAh battery, and it also supports 15-watt fast charging. So definitely a good battery here, great battery life, good longevity. The charging speed is decent, but 15-watt fast charging for a 5000 mAh battery is not really going to be what I would consider fast per se, but for most people it will at least get the job done. But one cool thing about the battery here is that with the Celero 5G Plus, this phone actually does support wireless charging. So if you want wireless charging, this phone is one of the few non-flagship phones that actually does have this feature. Now for the software, this is one drawback with this phone, because unfortunately with the Celero 5G Plus, we are only getting Android 12, and considering this is a lower end carrier branded phone, I'm not expecting it to get any kind of major updates. So if you do get this phone, you are going to have to be okay with being stuck on Android 12. That being said though, although it is definitely, again, quite a drawback considering all these other phones not only have Android 13, but they are going to get a bunch of updates too. The upside to this phone is, first of all, I want to say it's probably the cheapest phone here, and if you really just need something for the basics, you probably don't care that much about the software. And in my experience, despite only having Android 12, things still do run perfectly fine here. So unless having the latest software is really important to you, having Android 12 with this phone is probably not that much of an issue. And as far as other features go, in addition to having wireless charging, the Celero 5G Plus also does have NFC too, so definitely great there. And up next, we got the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G. With this phone, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 403, and a 19.5:9 aspect ratio. So similar to the other two, it does have a decently large display, albeit a bit smaller than the A23 5G and a lot smaller than the Celero 5G Plus. It also has a 1080p resolution, so nothing different there, and the nice 120Hz refresh rate. But one difference here is that with the A54 5G, we're actually getting a Super AMOLED display, which does make the image quality quite a bit nicer. The colors are a bit brighter and more vibrant. The display is actually a lot brighter in general, and the viewing angles are really good on this phone too. So as you can see, compared to the Celero, for example, the A54 5G has much better viewing angles. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, the A54 5G compared to something that doesn't have a Super AMOLED, this phone will be a lot easier to see. So in general, if you're looking for a phone that has a really nice display, but maybe instead of wanting a super large display, you'd rather just have really good image quality, then in that case, the A54 5G will be a great choice. For storage with this phone, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion too, so plenty of storage here. And then for security features, the A54 5G does have Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here in the display. So definitely a nicer, more premium look. Let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive. Maybe not as convenient as having it on the power key, but I feel like in general it's a lot more premium and just nicer overall. So I personally prefer it, but at the end of the day, it's probably not that much of a difference. And again, remember, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. For the camera here, up front, we got a 32 megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. And in case you're wondering, the depth sensing camera that's typically used for portrait mode is actually built into the main camera on this phone. So despite only having 3 cameras, portrait mode still works perfectly fine. And then for video with this phone, this is actually the first one here that can record 4K videos, and it can do this in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely great to see. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the A54 5G, so definitely great photo quality here. Kind of like with the A23 5G, it's not quite flagship level, but at the same time, for the average user, for pretty much anything you might be using your camera for, I do think it will get the job done just fine. For the RAM and processor, with the A54 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM, with the Exynos 1380 processor. For the performance, on one hand, compared to a slightly higher end device, the A54 5G is not quite at that level, so the next two phones we're about to go over are significantly faster than this. But at the same time, compared to the previous two, the A54 5G is at least noticeably faster, maybe not by that much, but if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, doing still more basic activities, but really just using your phone a bit more often, then I do think compared to the previous two, the A54 5G will be a better choice. Now on Geekbench 6, here are the scores I got. So again, definitely when compared to a flagship phone, it's not quite at that level, but at the same time, for a mid-range device, I would say the performance with the A54 5G is definitely impressive. For the battery, we are getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25W fast charging, so basically the exact same battery as the A23 5G, which is not a bad thing because a 5000 mAh battery, of course, is a really good battery. So if the battery is more of a priority for you, then of course, you're not going to go wrong with this phone. But keep in mind, this phone, like most mid-range phones, does not have wireless charging, so if you do want that feature, but you're still looking for more of a mid-range device, you might want to go with the Celero 5G Plus instead. For the software, the A54 5G does have Android 13, and unlike the A23 5G that came with Android 12, the A54 5G actually came with Android 13, so with this phone and Samsung software support, it will be getting Android 14, 15, 16, and 17. So if the software and long-term software support is more important to you, then out of all the phones here, the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G will be the best choice here. As far as other features go, this phone does have NFC, so it can use tap and pay just fine, but unfortunately the A54 5G does not have a headphone jack, so if you do have a normal pair of wired headphones you want to use them with this phone, you will need an adapter. Up next, we got the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. This phone is a great choice if you're looking for more of a flagship experience, but you still want to make sure it's a bit more affordable. With this phone, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 411, and a 19.5:9 aspect ratio. So this display here is pretty much the same thing as the A54 5G. The dynamic AMOLED may be a little bit better when it comes to brightness and color quality, but overall it's pretty much the same idea. On one hand, it's not the largest display out there, but on the other hand, the image quality is really good. So for most people, if you're consuming a lot of content, you're definitely not going to go wrong with this phone. For storage, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting 128GB of internal storage, but unfortunately this phone does not have microSD card expansion. When it comes to higher end devices, this is definitely nothing new, and depending on what you're doing with your phone, it can be a drawback to consider. But I feel like for the average user, even without microSD card expansion, 128GB is really plenty of storage anyway, so for most people, you probably will be perfectly fine. And this phone does have another version that has 256, so if you really need more storage, you could always get that, but keep in mind if you're actually getting this phone from Boost Mobile, it does have 128, so if you do want the one that has 256, you will have to get it unlocked. But honestly, at this point in 2023, the S21 FE is going for sometimes even less than half of its original full price, so depending on where you get it, you can probably find some pretty good deals anyway. But either way, again, for most people, the storage we get with the regular version of this phone should be perfectly fine. For security features, this phone does have Face Unlock and a nice in-display fingerprint scanner, so pretty similar to the A54 5G, but let's give it a try. There we go. One more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive, no issues at all. For the camera here, up front, we got a 32 megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 12 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. So definitely a great camera setup here. No macro camera, but the telephoto lens more than makes up for this. With this feature, the zoom is going to be quite a bit better. And with the telephoto lens, you can kind of get those close-up detailed images anyway. So with this phone, not having a macro camera is really not a loss. In addition to this, I do want to point out that even though the megapixel count is quite a bit lower compared to say every other phone we've gone over so far, the photo quality with the S21 FE, as you're about to see, is still quite a bit better. With higher end devices like this, the sensors and overall camera hardware is usually quite a bit better. So even though it doesn't have like a 50 megapixel camera, the photo quality is still really good. So to give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, and you can probably tell, compared to all the previous phones, the photo quality here is really on a completely different level. So if you're looking for really a flagship quality camera, which granted, I don't think everyone really needs, but if you really are taking a lot of pictures and you want the best quality you can get for the money, then I do think the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is definitely worth considering. And for video with this phone, it can record 4K videos in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely nice to see there. For the RAM and processor, with the S21 FE, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor, so definitely a great processor here. And for the performance, both this phone and the next phone we're about to go over do have significantly better performance than these three. So if you really are going to be on your phone a bit more, maybe doing more demanding activities, definitely keep this in mind, because in that case, one of these two will be a much better choice. Now here are the scores I got on Geekbench 6, so as always, definitely compare these to your current device, but as you can see, like I said, compared to the previous three, there is a significant difference with this phone. So if you are looking for a phone that's on one hand still a bit more affordable, but on the other hand really has that flagship level performance, then overall, this phone will be a great choice for you. For the battery, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a 4500 mAh battery. This supports 25 watt fast charging and wireless charging too, so compared to the others, the battery here isn't quite as large, but at the same time, the fast charging is good, and it does have wireless charging too. And in my experience, despite not having maybe the best battery life, it is still pretty good, so for regular use, I can tell you from lots of experience, it will get the job done just fine. For the software, this phone does have Android 13, and it will also be getting Android 14, 15, and 16, so quite a few updates here, definitely no complaints. And then for other features, on one hand it does have NFC, so you can use tap and pay, but like the A54 5G, unfortunately with the S21 FE, we're not getting a headphone jack. So again, if you do want to use normal wired headphones with this phone, you will have to get an adapter. And then last but not least, we got the Google Pixel 6a. This is definitely the most compact phone here, with the 6.1-inch OLED display, with the 1080p resolution, a PPI of 429, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. It's also the only phone here that doesn't have a 120Hz refresh rate, but honestly I feel like the display is just so nice in general, you don't really notice a whole lot. Now with an OLED display, it's pretty similar to an AMOLED, so the colors and brightness are really good, and the viewing angles are also good. So if you're looking for a display that has really good image quality, but maybe you want something a bit more compact, in that case of course course, the Pixel 6a will be a great choice. For storage, this phone has 128GB of internal storage, but like the S21 FE, unfortunately it doesn't have microSD card expansion, and it also doesn't have a variant that has more storage either, so if you do get the Pixel 6a, when it comes to storage, 128GB is pretty much all you're gonna get. I should also add that with this phone, it's not offered directly on Boost Mobile, but it is compatible, so definitely keep this in mind too. That being said though, for what it is, I would definitely say it's a lot more affordable than you might expect, because despite being around $600 factory unlocked full price, at least when it first came out, nowadays you can easily get it for less than $400. So overall, I would say it's a pretty good deal. But again, if you really do want to use a microSD card, or if you want more storage than 128GB, which the average user probably won't fill this up, but if you are really a heavy user and you have a ton of stuff on your phone, then you might want to get something that has even more storage than this. For security features, unfortunately this phone does not have Face Unlock, but it does have a decently nice in-display fingerprint scanner, so let's give that a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. For the camera, we got an 8MP selfie camera. Again, remember, being a slightly higher end device, the Pixel 6a, despite not having a bunch of megapixels, still does have really good hardware. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And then on the back, we got a dual camera with a 12.2MP main camera and a 12MP ultra wide camera. And for video, this phone can record 4K videos in the rear camera, but for whatever reason, only 1080p in the front. I don't really know why they did this, but if you're doing like vlogs, for example, and you want to record 4K selfie videos, you might want to go with the S21 FE instead. But as far as the overall photo quality goes, on one hand, between this and the S21 FE, I honestly couldn't tell you which one is actually better camera-wise. I've compared them in the past, and really sometimes this phone takes better photos in certain situations, and sometimes it's the other way around, so overall just keep in mind this phone and the S21 FE are both technically like entry-level flagship phones, not quite the top of the line, but considering the price you can currently get them at, they are definitely a great value. That being said though, to give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Pixel 6a. So overall, just like the S21 FE, definitely great photo quality here, and I feel like for the average user, you might not actually need a camera this good. For some people, something like the A23 5G or the Boost Mobile Celero 5G Plus might be perfectly fine, but if you really are taking a lot of pictures, and you really do care about having really nice photo quality, I do think the Pixel 6a will be a great choice. For the RAM and processor, with the Pixel 6a, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Google Tensor processor. So great performance here between this and the S21 FE. Again, these are the two fastest phones here. Now, when it comes to which one is faster between the two of them, I would say for the average user, you're not really going to notice a significant performance difference. They're pretty much about the same. That being said though, again, if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, doing more demanding activities, maybe you're doing high performance mobile gaming, or maybe you're editing a video on like CapCut, for example, in that kind of situation, the Pixel 6a will be a great choice. And here are the scores I got on Geekbench 6, so definitely compare this to not only your current device, but the other phones we've gone over in this video, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance wise. But yeah, I feel like overall this phone is probably going to be fast enough for pretty much anyone. Now for the battery, on one hand this phone has honestly the worst battery out of all these, but on the other hand it's really not terrible. For regular use, if you're around a charger for even a little while throughout the day, you should be just fine. But keep in mind, with a 4410 mAh battery, supporting 18W fast charging, and no wireless charging, if the battery is really like a top priority for you, you are going to want to get something else. But in my experience, again, it's definitely not terrible, and as long as you try to charge it for at least a little while throughout the day, it should be at least okay. For the software, this phone does have Android 13, and it should be getting Android 14, 15, and 16, so definitely great there. And then for other features, like the previous two, unfortunately it doesn't have a headphone jack, but it does at least have NFC, so with this phone, you can use tap and pay. But those were my 5 favorite phones you can use on Boost Mobile's network. In general, Boost Mobile definitely has quite a few great options, but I feel like at this point in 2023, in my opinion, these 5 really give us some of the best value for the money. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about any of these phones individually, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.